Welcome to Back2Back with your host, Chris Ellison. On Back2Back, we feature a lineup of Christian music, and most of it is Canadian. We love Canada, and we love our Canadian artists. We want to showcase their music on this show. We'll feature reviews, artist interviews, and we'll play some of their songs. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining us on Back2Back.
Back2Back, stronger together.
Well, welcome back. Well, I'm happy to say that we've got a special feature today. We're going to be focusing specifically on Steve Bell, and some people may know him and some may not. He's a celebrated Canadian Christian artist from Winnipeg, Manitoba. He's renowned for his profound lyrics and soulful acoustic sound. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Steve's music blends traditional folk influences with contemporary Christian themes, exploring faith, justice, and personal reflection. And in his latest album, he continues in this tradition, showcasing his commitment to deep, reflective songwriting. He's known for his engaging storytelling and dedication to both social and spiritual issues. He maintains a compelling voice in the Christian music industry, and we're happy to have him on right now. Steve, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you asking me on. It's an honor.
Well, we're really happy to have you on because as we were talking earlier, a lot of people know you. A lot of people that I come into contact with know Steve Bell, and you have been doing this for so long, and you've had so many albums that people have at least heard of you. And we want to get to know what you've been doing over the last while. I mean, you're out west, so you're not in Ontario where we are, and so sometimes we don't see some of the activities and things you're doing. And there's a lot going on, and we're excited about that. And I want to bring that to the people who are watching Back2Back. So we're really glad that you can be a part.
Glad to be part of it for sure.
I mentioned a few minutes ago that your music intertwines like a faith, hope, and social justice in a unique way. How do you navigate these themes in your songwriting? And is there a specific message or call to action that you hope that resonates with your audience?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm not really all that deliberate. Like, people will say to me, what ties your last album together, or whatever. What's the theme? There's no theme, but songs come. All of a sudden there's 10 of them or 12 of them. I think, well, it's time to put together an album. I put them together, and then I look at it and kind of go, oh, I obviously have been thinking about this or thinking about that because there's some themes that weave in, so I normally discover in retrospect what I'm thinking about. I'm not sort of thinking and then kind of going, oh, now I need to write about this or that or the other thing. And so in terms of my whole artistry, songs, I read and I pray and I think and I engage with culture and news and world events, and then songs come. And then I have to now look at the songs and go, okay, what am I thinking? Where is the Spirit leading me? And so I have to find out afterward, not. So for example, if there's a social justice theme in a song, I didn't think in advance, oh, I need to write about that. The song came, and I think, oh, I need to think about that.
Your music intertwines faith, hope, social justice in a unique way. So how do you navigate these themes in your songwriting? And is there a specific message or call to action that you hope resonates with your audience?
Oh, I mean, probably not as deliberate as people would expect. I typically don't, have I'm concerned about this or this global event. I should write a song. I typically read and I pray and I watch news and I think and I stress, and then songs come out. And then I kind of go, oh, this is clearly about this or that. I should pay attention. So it's almost like my songs lead me more than I lead them. It's like I chase my own songs after. So I've got a new album coming out in a month called The Glad Surprise. And when I wrote a little booklet to go with it. And the whole purpose of writing the book was to actually investigate my songs, to find out what's going on in my soul, and then trying to think about where am I being led. Mm-hmm. So it's funny for a lot of people in their spiritual walk, artists, they do said work and then they write about it, where I write about it and then I do the work. Does that make sense?
It does. It's interesting because you'd think writers would think of an idea or something they want to say and write it into a song, where it sounds like yours almost has the opposite. You write something and then it sort of comes alive.
Well, that's more the case than anything else. And usually I go, oh, I guess that's what I'm thinking, or I guess that's where the Spirit's leading me, or that's something I have to chase.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's hard to describe. So when
Yes.
I wrote this little booklet for the new album, I found out about my songs. Um, and then because I was writing about all of them together, I realized, oh, this song is talking to that song. Like there's resonances in between. I discovered all these sort of links, and I go, oh, I guess that there is a thread that kind of goes through, but it's not deliberate. It's not like I had this thought and how do I weave this into a tapestry. It just happens,
Yeah.
and then I discover afterward, and then I got to go tour it and tell people why I wrote the songs or whatever. You know.
Yeah.
Now I do. I am drawn to social. I mean, I grew up in an evangelical church where faith was, or Christian faith was described mostly as a personal thing, me and Jesus. And there's definitely a personal aspect to my faith and to how I understand the gospel. But the more I read it, it can't be divorced from social reality. I more and more I'm understanding that Christian faith, it has to address our social issues, and justice matters. It's not something we do if we have extra time.
Yeah.
And that's hard in this world because with a global context, and we get way too much information about events, but not enough information about what's behind it. So it's hard to know
Yeah.
how to respond. Like, how do you respond to Israel Gaza? You
Yeah.
know, like, who knows what all the back work things are like. So we see this intensely awful event unfolding in front of our eyes, but who gets to say what's actually going on? You
Yeah.
know, and so it's hard to know. So all my heart can do is bleed for the people that are suffering. And that comes out a little bit in a song of mine,
Yeah.
on the new album. But it's not so much to have a lot of confidence to say, and here's what I think we should do about it.
Yeah, because there's really two sides of it, and maybe they're intertwined. We write about Christ and about words and music that can help draw people into the hope that Christ offers. But at the same time, we have things happening in our world and real
Yeah,
people and real messy situations, and sometimes even in our own lives,
yeah,
where we have to have an opinion. I think we should have an opinion about what's happening around us. And so sometimes
yeah.
are they separate or are they intertwined?
Yeah, and that's complicated. I don't like. I think they are intertwined, but how do you unfold those, and how do you speak about them? I think, like, for me, I don't tend to sort of come down to, here's my position on this or that or the other thing. If you listen to me for long, you could probably guess. But I can, hopefully, in my songs, something of the humility of Christ and the love of Christ can come through, and that can say that there's a fundamental truth behind all of these things, mercy, love, human dignity, God's intention about a good creation, all these kinds of things that we can start to say, like, no matter what's going on out there, that was not God's plan.
Yeah.
And those of us who have been blessed with sort of a foresight of the coming kingdom can give witness to what the kingdom of God is going to look like. It's sort of like, I mean, the way I think of Christians, say, versus non-Christians, typically aren't better people for the most part, and we do as much damage, it seems, as almost anybody.
Yeah.
So, but it seems to me that we get given a glimpse of the last book of the story, like how the story ends,
Mhm.
and we're asked to live now as if it's happening now.
Yeah.
Right. And so we give witness to the last chapter of the story now in this present situation. So that's beyond anybody's personal opinion about a social or global event.
Yeah.
That's something about a posture.
Yeah.
Uh, what is our posture in this world right now of political division and social upheaval and fracturedness, and
Yeah.
and all the hurts that are in conversation, the church and the LGBT community or the indigenous community or all those kinds of things. Well, it gets pretty complicated, but what's our posture, right? And we can get from the Gospels. I've been reading the Gospel of Mark again lately, and I'm just astonished by the posture of Christ in those complex, and if anybody has any sort of social analysis of what was happening at the time of Christ with the Empire of Rome and the Jewish religious community trying to manage this oppressive situation, and how do we deal with it, and then Christ's posture in it is quite remarkable, and that I think I think that is nothing we need to have an opinion about. We just give witness to it.
Yeah.
Right? About how we approach and how we live in this world and how we sing our songs and how we do business and how we parent and what kind of neighbors we are. And so more and more, the older I get, my opinions are going to come out in my songs. My theology is going to come out in my songs, but hopefully the gospel comes out in my posture.
Do you find that the church in general, and no criticism to the church, it tends to shy away from some of these types of issues that aren't directly related to Christ, social justice issues? And the reason why I ask is because I've been in touch with a lot of pastors regarding the article that I wrote for Faith Today, and one person admitted that they really kind of shy away from social justice issues or political issues or having an opinion about something. And I found that curious. Is that something that we see more of these days?
Well, I think, boy, I'm just winging it here. Okay. So
You're not tied to any of this.
Yeah, I know. I just, but I think, again, with globalization and with internet, we have way too much access to information that we have no control over events. We don't know what we actually know. If say if you look at American politics, watch CNN and then watch Fox News, and you'd swear two completely different things are happening.
Yeah.
And so who do you listen to, and how do you know, right? And everybody can say, well, I feel in my spirit. Well, if people who love Jesus feels different things in their spirit, what do you do with that? So it's just really hard. And I think with pastors too, and I feel this in my own work too. I mean, how do you? All of us are also complicit in all these things. If you bank, if you invest money, you're complicit in injustice. Period. There's no way out of it. If you buy food in a grocery store, you are complicit in systems like structural injustices that happen somewhere. It's just the reality. So how do we say to each other, we can do better without being judgy, right? Without saying you're the one, are the rich 2% really the problem? I know lots of very wealthy people who are lovely human beings. I can't demonize them. Are the poor, really innocent of all the things that happen to them? Well, I know some poor people that are just really not good people. And some of the calamity that happens to them happens because of who they've decided to be. So it's just not so simple as saying, here's the problem and here's the problem, or this person is the problem, or this political ideology is the problem. Not so. Yeah. I think sin has just infected all of us so deeply. Yeah. And again, this is why it's important. Yes, we need to have opinions. Yes, we need to speak them with courage and without demonizing others. With some humility, with the anticipation of a person who disagrees with us. Maybe they have goodness in them. You know what I mean? I don't have to think of you as a monster because you don't think the same way as I do about a social issue. I can sort of maybe assume that you mean well, and you, as well as I do, want to have a wonderful, society that we can live in safety and everybody can belong. So I think it's just delicate. And I think it's just delicate. And some people have the personality, they can put out opinions harshly or strongly, and others just, you've got to manage a whole congregation where different people have different investments.
But you're right. People have different opinions and perspectives. Yeah. And, we don't want to dilute the message of Christ because we have an opinion that's different than someone else's. So I can see how that could happen. And you
could see in the Gospels how Christ Jesus was always wooing people into his orb, right?
Yeah.
And people of like, if you just even look at the social makeup of the disciples,
Yeah.
like those the 12, they should not have gotten along together.
Yeah.
You have people like, if you look at what's going on there, who is chosen, like some of those were natural enemies, and the dynamic was happening. So, for example, let's just go here. A few years after Jesus was born, the Romans came in to squash a rebellion in the north, a Jewish anti-imperial rebellion, where the Romans basically executed, I think it's like on crosses, executed in Galilee. Now, if Galilee was, I think, there might have been 20, 30,000 people living there at the time. So that basically meant everybody had an uncle or a brother or a father or a friend or a neighbor who was brutally murdered by this imperial overlord. The collective trauma of that, it can't be calculated.
Yeah.
And then 30 years later, Jesus comes out of the desert and says, you must love your enemy.
Yeah.
And your enemy was not somebody that you disagreed with about vaccines or masking. Your enemy was somebody that brutally murdered your kin. And Jesus said, you must love them. We have lost
That
all
is profound.
of what he was asking. And you can only imagine people hearing that, like,
Mhm.
how's that gospel?
Mhm.
Right? Where's the justice in that?
Yeah.
And I think, we got to hear the offense of what Jesus was asking people to do.
Yeah.
It's offensive.
It's a very everything was different. And when you look at it in that context,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that
Yeah.
I would fare as well.
Yeah. Oh no, I know.
What's neat about Jesus, though, is he focused on the person,
Yeah.
not his political beliefs or what they were doing.
Yeah.
He had opinions about that, I'm sure, but he always seemed to connect with the person below all or underneath all of the other things that get in the way for us all.
Yeah. Well, even if you look at the story of Zacchaeus, right? The one who unjustly, used his position to rob people of their money and stuff. And it says Jesus sort of sees him and goes for lunch. I mean, according to the story, he doesn't tell Zacchaeus what to do with what he's done. Zacchaeus encounters Christ and then says, you know what, I'm giving everything back fourfold. It seems to have been a voluntary response to having met the person Jesus, that he corrects his past.
Yeah.
It wasn't that Jesus said, if you don't do this, this is going to befall you. It seems that they had lunch together. And the encounter was so powerful that it completely radicalized Zacchaeus' understanding of living in economy and justice and truth and goodness and beauty and all this kinds of stuff. And there's a massive change. And you see that also in just the fact that these 12 that hung out with Jesus some of them would have been very natural enemies.
Yeah.
And violently so. So it's something, I mean, that's where the personal Jesus comes in, I think.
Yeah.
That there's something about the encounter that reshapes who we are at a profound level.
Yeah.
And so then we need that encounter, and we need to trust the resurrection, which basically means if that encounter drives us to places that we're going to lose everything,
Mm-hmm.
we're not worried about that, because we know that ultimately that's not true, right?
Yeah.
That there is something after what's happening next. And so we can, with courage, address issues. We can, with courage, speak into other people's lives, sometimes prophetically, and that can be hard for people to hear. It can be hard for me to hear if you're going to speak it into mine, But if we can trust the love of Christ as exemplified by the cross, and we can trust in the resurrection, that the worst thing isn't the last thing, that there's something after that, which is glorious and beautiful. I think we can start as a church to maybe have a different posture in this very fractured culture.
As you've recorded each album, and at each album representing a time in your life, a story, a chapter in your life, where different things were happening in the world, and perhaps you were responding to those or had an opinion about those. When you look at the number of artists albums you have, looking back, are there any particular albums or projects that you're especially proud of, and why?
Yeah. I mean, the first one for sure, Comfort My People, because it was just such a surprise. I put out this album, I put out like 100 copies of cassettes, and I thought it was done. And that was over 30 years ago and 23 albums ago. I just didn't even expect a second one. So there's just a big surprise that happened with that first one. So I'm proud of that. I'm still delighted about that. I did not, it wasn't a strategy. I didn't think there was a future. I had some songs. I put it out, and here I am. So that was lovely. In I think 1994, I put out an album called Burning Ember, and there's a song on there called Burning Ember. And that was the first time I wrote a song that when I sat back, I looked at the song and I went, that song knows more than I do. And I would say that one of the theological mentors of my life is the song that I wrote.
Interesting, because that was going to be my next question about your influences and inspirations.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that a song you wrote would speak to you?
Yeah, but I just remember kind of going back and then kind of going, oh, there's something more about this gift, spiritually speaking, in terms of music, than I can be a clever songwriter, or I can write a hooky melody, or I can, I can do something soothing to your soul. The fact that through the exercise of this gift, like truth got revealed or wisdom got revealed that was beyond me, that ended up teaching me, that literally changed my orientation to everything I do now. So every time I write a song, I sit back and kind of go, okay, what do you know? Like, where are you leading me? Where are you taking me? And this gets back to where I said, well, when I finished an album, a bunch of songs, I have to go now find out what they want from me.
Yeah.
And there's something about art that spirit-led art, maybe, I don't know, but even not even then. I mean, how many like non-Christian poets or artists have said profound things that they shouldn't have known, but they did, or people whose lives are a wreck, but they write about truth in a way that you wouldn't think a wrecked person could do. And so that album, Burning Ember, was the first time I think I started to understand what art is, and that art really has a prophetic ness to it. It doesn't necessarily mean prophetic that it knows the future, but it knows things that the person shouldn't know.
Yeah.
And I started to respect my songs in a way I probably wouldn't have before, because I would have described them before as, having potential, for sales or that kind of thing. Where now I don't think that way anymore. I don't like whether this new album sells or not doesn't really. I mean, I hope it does, because I could use some money. But you know what I mean? Like, but that's really not what I'm not looking. I have for a long time looked to say, is this marketable? Those kinds of questions don't really matter anymore. I just want to know what my songs know and where they want me to go.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I want to do.
Carolyn Aarons told me recently that when we were talking about this issue, that there's been a real loss in Canada as far as supporting what we might consider the arts, art associated. I mean, right now, there's a lot of worship that seems to be the genre that everybody's recording and playing and performing. But there's a lot of artists out there who write in different ways that may not be as streamlined or, at this point, but they're creating art. Where do you think the balance is of a Christian artist writing and creating art, as opposed to, or maybe in addition to, a ministry opportunity to reach somebody for Christ?
Right. So yeah. So there's music as propaganda. So I used to, in the early days, I used to write commercials. People would pay me to write a McDonald's commercial or a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial. And that's using my artistic ability to come up with melody and rhyme schemes and all that kind of stuff. But the purpose of it is to sell a product. It's propaganda. And I think often Christian music has been theologically propagandic. I'm going to use my songs to basically sell you on a theological concept, or a particular version of orthodoxy, my brand or whose brand, whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's not always bad. I mean, using music to inform people or get people on board, something isn't a bad thing, but it's not, it's low art. It's low, it's you know, I mean, I think the problem with art and the reason why a lot of churches have a hard time, like, or why artists even want to be under a church, is that the point of it is you have to be free to receive what comes and put it out.
Mm.
And if I think Pastor X is going to, cut me off of funding if I say this,
Yeah.
now I'm actually controlling the outcome. And by definition, that's not quite art the way an artist feels it. At the same time, we could be pretty wingy people and we can say things we probably shouldn't. So we probably do need some oversight. And I do have mentors and I have people I run things by and all that kind of stuff. But I can't work within an institution. I can't say I can't put out that song because I'm a Baptist, or I can't put out this song because I'm a Catholic, or that would just I have to let the song be and then find a spot for it.
Yes.
And hopefully then there should be some grace with the listener too, that if you hear something on my new album that doesn't sit quite right, I would assume you understand I'm a human being and that no song of mine can bear the full burden of truth.
Yeah.
Right. And being a sinful person, or if we don't like that word, being a finite person, being someone who can't see the whole all the time.
Mm-hmm.
A 3-minute song shouldn't have the burden of that.
Yeah.
The other thing too is that sometimes our art is not necessarily saying what we think, but it's pointing to something. There's something in the weeds here that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And I only have the language that I have, right? So what do I use, And so that stresses folks out that think everything should be always orthodox and pure. So I think that can be a barrier for churches. Like, how do we bring in these unruly people that do this thing called art?
Yeah.
That don't want to be dictated to, that might say frightening things or might say unorthodox things or might say, might contradict doctrines or traditions or whatever. But even if you think of, like, Bruce Cockburn has been, for me, when I heard Bruce Cockburn in 1978, it rocked my world. I had never heard, apparently he was a Christian, but he was chasing down all kinds of themes that I didn't even know were part of a Christian's concern. Environmental issues, social justice issues that had nothing to do with people being saved or not saved. They had just anything to do with that person shouldn't be treated this way, or this social group should have access to well-being, and shouldn't be blocked, whatever. And I thought, it just blew my world out. Now, Bruce has been through a long life of things that probably, in stages that would probably be frowned upon by good church-going people. But in the end, his trajectory has been deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the love of Christ. And the deeper he gets in there, it's sort of like each song pushes more weeds out of the way, until he's into the open waters. And his last album may be the most profoundly Christian album I've ever heard in my life. And I don't think I'm not even sure he mentions Jesus, but I know he goes to an evangelical church and plays in the worship band. But at 78 years old, there's something of a deep lament, and a deep sadness, a deep anger at the things that are as they shouldn't be, but a deep love, and there's also he's wooing us into Christ in a way. His fists are down. He's like the grandfather now that doesn't have to fight the battles because he's not going to live long enough to deal with the outcomes. And so there's a peace about him. I'm glad I followed this guy for the last 40 years.
So he's one of your inspirations and influences. Have there been others?
but
that
not
has,
just because of what he said, but because of how he did it. The
yeah.
fact that he allowed himself the freedom and the leeway to sort of, go off onto rabbit trails that would stress people out. But in the end, there's been a trajectory that's been beautiful. Yeah, there's others. A lot of the deepest influences of me are people I know, people I've worked with. Carolyn Arends, I mean, she's brilliant.
Mhm.
Her trajectory and her theological path and how she's pursued that. I sort of watched her grow and learn and mature as a human being and as a songwriter, as an artist, and as a communicator is really inspiring to me.
Mhm.
Glenn Soderholm is an Ontario singer songwriter pastor. I just love the guy, and I've learned so much from him, and not only his writing but his inspirations. So there's just so many,
Yeah.
lots of secular artists, I've been deeply influenced by either musically or even by the kinds of things that they tackle in their songwriting.
And you
Um,
sort of have a storytelling way of presenting your music.
yeah.
How do you craft songs that not only reflect your personal experiences but also strike a chord with listeners from diverse backgrounds?
Well, again, this is a disappointing answer, but I don't. I write the songs, then I kind of go, oh, so, and then I start talking about them in concert. So here's a song that's from a psalm, say Psalm 16,
Yeah.
that I wrote, and then I realized afterwards that my soul was working on this trauma, that
Yeah.
somehow this was part of my prayer and how I was wrestling with a childhood trauma or an anxiety or a joy or whatever. And then I kind of go, oh, and then I tell that story.
Uh,
Right. And then the more I tell the story, there's something about telling your story over and over again. Like what my job is to tell my stories night after night after night after night. And that's also like the power of the AA movement, Alcoholics Anonymous, that you tell your story. And the
yeah.
more you hear yourself tell your story to people who are actually listening, you find wisdom and you find trajectory and you see God. Oh, God was always there. The Spirit of Christ was always there, but you have to tell your story enough to recognize it.
Mhm.
And I think one of the benefits of being Steve Bell is it's actually my job to tell my story night after night after night. And people, and there's a few couples in Southern Ontario who've been to over 40 concerts, and they've both of them told me they said we'll stop coming when there's no new stories, or there's no new version of an old one. And it's not like I'm changing the stories from my past, but this how I tell it changes the more I understand it, the more I see things in it. And I'll emphasize this and de-emphasize that part because I'm starting to realize, oh, these these stories aren't really about history as much as they're digging at meaning. What's the meaning behind the story, And so I've got a story that I tell about my dad coming out to the bar to see me play when I first started to play, and I didn't want to tell my dad I was a bar musician for about 6 months. He didn't know. He was living in Edmonton and I was in Winnipeg, and he thought I was working in a music store. And I just didn't know how to tell him that I was my father, the Baptist minister, the man who I loved the most in my life. He was a deeply wonderful human being. And I didn't want to tell him I was a lowly bar musician, not because I thought he'd be angry or anything. I just thought he'd be disappointed. And I
Mhm.
didn't want to disappoint my dad. And after lying to him for about 6 months or even closer to a year, he showed up in Winnipeg and found out where I was playing and showed up to the bar and spent a whole night with me in the bar.
That's awesome.
And at the very end of the evening, I drove him back to the hotel, and I said, "Dad, I can't believe you came there." In 1978, Baptist ministers did not go to the bar to hang out with their sons,
Yeah.
unless they were there to drag them out. And he
Yeah.
hung out with friends. We had a great time, And I said, "I can't believe you came there." And I'm going to cry. I cry after telling the story. He looked at me and said, "How can I not? You're my son." Now, I don't remember a lot of the details of the story. I don't remember who was there. I don't remember the color of the walls. I don't remember how many people were there. I was in two bands at the time, so I can't now no longer remember which band it was that night he came to. One night, I think it was this one. So there's a lot of details that I've lost in the retelling,
Mhm.
but the ones that have not been lost are the ones that lead to that line. How can I not? You're my son. And so I realized in the end, in the same way that Burning Ember knew something and was leading me somewhere that I didn't know I was going to go, my own story was leading me somewhere. that in telling it and retelling it, I've discovered more and more how
Interesting.
my own story is one of my mentors. But I um, I have learned to pay attention and to retell it and to always tell it with the eye to meaning, the truth of the meaning, not the truth of the details. That doesn't mean that we get to sort of make up stories and pass them off as true, but to really understand that the historical data is not the truth of the story.
Yeah.
The truth of the story is that my dad didn't want to lose his boy, and he bought a ticket to fly to Winnipeg to let his boy knew that he knew who he was. He was Steve Bell's dad, and there's nothing that Steve Bell could do about that. And he just wanted me to know. Art isn't the same thing as sort of, like Christian art isn't the same thing as scholarly academic theology. It's not what it's trying to do. It's trying to get at the things that there aren't words for. I grew up in a Protestant evangelical, conservative background. We certainly weren't part of the holiness movement. I've never spoken in tongues. I'd love to. I love the idea of it. Like, I think it's cool. But I have. It's called melody. I have said things with melodies that I have no words for. I've said things with poetry that I have no words for, that I couldn't say in prose. Like there's something welling up inside of me and coming out as melody and poetry, and the combination of melody and poetry, and silences, and which it's language. It's language that I myself don't have control over. But it's welling up inside and coming out. And I feel I have to do that. And the only mistake I could make would be to stop it. And so I have to do it, and I have to trust that if there is flaw in it, if there is error in it, God's bigger than that.
Life is messy.
Yeah, life is messy, and
it's vulnerable. We need to be vulnerable and real.
Yeah, totally. And in the end, if the coming kingdom of God can't sort of gently correct some of these like offshoots or off branches and stuff, that we're really in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's just a matter of continue to pray and think and read and struggle and cry and fuss and fume and dream and hope. And out of that, try to create something that's beautiful and compelling, that woos people towards the love of Christ in a way that gives new language, new expressions, that brings more and more people in all the time. Like if you even see the church's first thing that they had to deal with was the problem of exclusion. Like, how do we bring in people, the Gentiles, who by definition can't be part of this? By definition, they can't be part of this. We have to understand that the first theological issue of the church was dealing with outsiders. And Paul and certainly Jesus kept on going to these margins where people had their backs against the wall, people that weren't brought into the center of things, who, because of whatever, race, genetics, maybe even intelligence, wealth or not, were pushed to the margins, and Jesus kept going there. And he kept on saying theologically, like, that's kind of where we're going, folks. Like, and it was really, really, really hard for the Jewish core to wrap their brains around that, their minds around that, because everything about their identity is we are defined by who we're not. And then Jesus comes along, like I said, after 30 years after the occupiers executed 15,000 men in his neighborhood, said you have to love your enemies, like you have to bring them in. Like if that doesn't make your heart stop, you're not hearing the story. You're not hearing the unreasonableness of the gospel. You're not hearing how unfair forgiveness is. Forgiveness is fundamentally not just.
Yes. And I think when we try to make sense of every piece of this and God and make it line up, and we're going to fall short. And so I think it's in realizing we're mere humans. We do our best. We try to understand. We're wrong a lot of the times.
Yeah.
but it doesn't change who God is. We don't have to mathematically prove everything about God for him to be real in our life and change our lives and other people. And when we realize that, for me, it takes a little bit of the pressure off and to just be real, be vulnerable, be me.
Yeah. And with humility, and also, I mean, what also complicates Christian ministry is that we also know that there's something pastoral about it, right? I'm not just here to expose my vulnerable, beautiful heart, or my unique pain.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm here to minister as well. Like I'm here to pastor, and there's something about doing our expression, our self-expression, in a way that also has a medicine to it.
Yeah.
Right. It needs it if for it to have the spirit of Christ, it can't just be honest.
Yeah.
It needs to be medicinal. And so what does that look like?
That's a good point.
And so then when I look at what I'm writing, if I'm going to edit what wants to come out, I do want to look at and say, where's the medicine in this song, and make sure I don't edit that out.
Yeah.
Because in the end, I don't think the people that really like Steve Bell music like it because I'm vulnerable. I think they like it because there's medicine in it. And I don't know how to explain that. I can't make that happen. But I can certainly posture myself in a way when I'm writing to not be in the way of that, at least.
Right? Yes, not to get in the way of what God can do.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's part of it too. And that's what complicates, say Christian music as opposed to secular music, is that what makes it Christian? Is it Christian because we say Jesus? I remember back in the day, your song wouldn't get radio play if it didn't have a certain amount of Jesus hits per minute. That's what made it Christian. And I'm not making that up.
Yeah.
Disc jockeys talked about like how many Jesus hits per minute. So if I gave them a song that didn't have enough Jesus hits in it, then they had to get it from another song. Like they actually did it. Like it was a little
interesting.
Silly. Yeah, I mean that's a whole other story. But so it's not like I have to have like what makes it Christian. And I think it is in the end. Is it because of doctrine? Yes and no. I'm not quite sure that our music has to always be doctrinally pure. I don't think anybody's doctrines are pure. Like we're finite beings trying to understand an infinite God. Really, I haven't figured out my wife yet. Like and I've been sleeping with her for 42 years. Tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah, and so if she's still a mystery to me, maybe we can extend some of that grace to God.
And why not? Why do we have to understand everything for it to make sense and be real? Sometimes if we acknowledge the fact that we're never gonna know, there's peace in that, I think, because we won't know.
But that doesn't mean I know nothing about her. I know some things about her that I could say boldly. But for me to say that's the entirety of who Nancy is, that would be an arrogance. That's what colonialism is. It's like it's sort of dominating and controlling another person's identity. And I don't think we should do that to God, and I don't think God does that to us.
But you know more of him and your wife after time has passed.
I know,
and you've learned by experience and patterns of behaviors that there's offers some predictability in your understanding and wisdom as it develops, as we as husbands learn wisdom really fast, what not to say and how to comport ourselves in a respectful way, or else our lives can become more challenging because when we put our foot in our mouth and it doesn't always go well.
Yeah, but again, those situations are just not attending deeply. The mistakes I make aren't because I mean to. I mean, I've never in my life intentionally hurt my wife. I mean, I'm not that kind of person. I've never intentionally hurt anybody, but I know I've hurt people. And the hurt usually comes from inattention or like assuming, that I know something about the core of another human being that I have no right to, I have no access to. Why would I assume? Which is why, like, even when we look at others in our society, whether they be LGBTQ or whether they be from a different religion base, like, Islam or atheist or whatever, and we think we know who they are, and then we impose that on them. I mean, that's colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than saying that person who I'm looking at, to borrow from a fairly recent Brian Dirksen song, is unrepeatable.
Mm-hmm.
They're an unrepeatable freaking miracle.
Yeah.
And that's my first stance. Not, do you have this political stance? Do you understand human sexuality the way I do, or don't? Do we have an agreement about doctrine? That the person I am speaking to is an unrepeatable miracle.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to the person, not not necessarily, and it's not like we agree with everything, but it's me, it's you, it's the person in front of us. And none of us are above anyone else. We're all broken people stumbling through life, hopefully learning some things. It's about the person and the need that they have.
But see, then you look at Jesus, like we talked earlier about posture. Like, Jesus doesn't really do a lot of doctrinal teaching. He just, say what you will, you're not going to get a lot of doctrine from Jesus. You get some, not much. You get a lot from Paul, but what you get from Jesus is the Father's posture to the Father's creation.
Mm-hmm.
You get the posture, right?
Yeah.
This is, Jesus is the Son of the Abba, the Father, and who reflects perfectly, according to our scriptures, perfectly the Father. And the posture of Jesus towards us is the posture of God, the Father. It's not like he has a different one. God's mad, but Jesus isn't. Don't worry, I'll talk to God. I'll get you in. That's not true. There's not two gods. There's one God. And that's the whole doctrine of the Trinity. The posture of Jesus is the posture of the Father, of God, the Creator. And that we can imitate without a whole lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And that you can feel pretty abruptly when people talk to you, if you're getting it or not. That you can feel pretty abruptly if you pay attention to how you're dealing with somebody.
Yeah.
Like, is that my posture? And if it isn't, why not? What needs to be healed? What's the problem? What's my anxiety? What's my fear? Here. And if I can let, through the Spirit, through prayer, through reflecting on the teachings of Jesus and the posture of Jesus, the tone of voice, all those kinds of things, more and more, whatever comes out of my mouth, whether it be a song or a story, or a consolation or a challenge, is going to have that medicine in it.
Yeah.
That medicinal thing that makes it ministry.
Yeah.
Not just entertaining or whatever, right? And I think the more we artists are allowed to do that and encouraged to do that, I think art could play a much bigger place in the shaping of a society that starts to reflect the kingdom that's going to come one way or another.
Wow.
Wow.
Steve,
it's going to happen. We get to vanguard it. I mean, that's we're no more special than anybody else on the planet, but we get to participate in being the vanguard of the coming kingdom, which is going to come whether we do that work or not. So it's just opportunity. That's
Steve, this has been a great interview talking with you, because not only did we talk about music and artistry and a lot of, what you're doing, and we're also going to get to what's going on now. What's your new album's coming out? We're going to talk about that, but I think this conversation was rich in depth and in some profound concepts that apply to us all as growing people and messy people and developing, growing people in our world. And I think it's important there are important things to talk about. And I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation and bring out some unique things that are connected to music, but also extending beyond.
Yeah. Well, I hope, once I start talking, things come out that I'm usually embarrassed about later, so I hope people receive it as it is. Again, I'm just a schmuck from Winnipeg, trying to make sense of, the things that compel me and the restrictions on my life due to finances and family and obligations and stuff, but also deeply, I cannot not believe in God. I can't.
Yeah.
I cannot not believe that somehow there's something in this Jesus thing that is just connected deeply to ontological truth. There's
Yeah.
something there, and I can despair as much as anybody, and I have been despairing a lot this last year. I'm
Yeah.
despairing over some horrible things that are happening in the world. I'm despairing in how large segments of Christianity have uh, have veered so far away from what just seems to be obvious teachings of Jesus. I don't know what to do. And these are people I love, and I don't know how to speak about these things. So there's many, many nights that I'm crying in my pillow, and I don't know what to do about it. But I can't not hope. I can't even try to not hope. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
I just sort of feel that God loves God's creation far more than I ever could, and God is going to hold on to it in a way that I can't. And I'm just trying my best to be part of that in a way. This friend of mine years ago, I was my wife and I were building a house and out in the country, and it got way over budget. It just kind of went like just typically like one of these things, and we weren't ready for it. And I was in a panic about the finances, and I was telling a friend of mine, I was on the road, and I was telling a friend of mine about it before a concert, and then we went to the concert and came back to his place. When I got to bed, there was an envelope underneath my pillow, and there was a check for $1,000, and there was a thing that said on the front, "Just want to be part of it," and it was really touching. And so I went up to the next morning. I said to the guy, like, "Keep the check. I really appreciate it. This doesn't even begin to cover what I need to get through this next stage. So you're kind of throwing good money after bad." And he said, "I know, and I just want to be part of it."
Wow.
And I kind of look at if in a small way I can sort of put a check under God's pillow and say, "I just want to be part of it." I know this doesn't really change anything.
Yeah.
It's not me that's going to solve the issues, but there's just something. And he was honored to be part of the struggle we're going through. And I just feel that with my own gift, my own songs, my own albums. It's just my way of just sort of saying to God in my own way, I just want to be part of it. If that's okay with you,
Yeah.
you don't really need me, but it's just this. I believe in what you're doing, and
Yeah.
I'll contribute what I've got. You know?
Wow. Well, Steve, before we end, and I want to hear about what you're, and this has been a great time with you, and I appreciate that. The first thing I want you to do is give me a tour of your studio.
Okay.
And the second thing, and just tell us what's coming up. Where can we find you? Where we can learn more about you? But this
Yeah.
studio is making me drool, and you've got some equipment in there that I haven't seen in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. My manager, business partner, ministry partner, Dave Zaglinski, he ran this as a commercial studio for years. And so he had two fully decked out commercial recordings. So he was doing, radio jingles and albums and all that. And then right, on my second album, I was really looking for someone to help me with what I'm doing. And he was tired of the commercial recording business and wanted to do something more meaningful. So he just said, "Why don't we just put everything of mine and everything of yours into one basket and call it, Steve Bell Ministry?" And so he's been with me for over 30 years. But I inherited all of his gear and his expertise.
Nice.
His name was Dave Zaglinski. So I'll just take you out. So here's an office. I won't show you much about that. But there's a safe.
Ha!
And if you go through the safe doors, you will come into Signpost Studio. And so here is, we basically run Pro Tools. So anybody that knows recording, it's digital recording, but we still have all the old analog gear. So we have the Soundcraft 24 channel board that's still operable. We have a functioning, how do I do this? That was like serious gear back in the day. That's a 2-inch tape, 24 track recording. I mean, that would have cost $60,000 to buy back in the day, and it's probably worth, minus 60,000 right now. I mean, no, like but it's still cool gear, and it still works, and everyone's fired up. We have all kinds of outboard gear. A lot of this stuff is analog, really high end analog gear. Sounds lovely. You kind of need a kind of an old world guy to know how to use them. but there's a warmth to them that's really interesting. And got all kinds of guitars. They're not all here right now. My most recent is a 100-year-old dobro that Ronnie Haldison, a legendary guitar player,
Oh, nice.
sold me. He's retired now. He's got tinnitus, so he can't really hear,
Yeah.
and so it's become quite painful for him and sad. So I was glad I could pick it up and honor him, and I'm just glad to own that thing. You come through we have a little recording space. It's not very big. It's enough to do guitars and vocals. If we need, we've got some wonderful microphones. This we just got from Roy Salmon when he closed Whitewater.
Yeah.
Some nice vintage gear. I recently picked up, that's a 1970 Martin New Yorker. That's also from Roy Salmon's studio, as a gift from them. So it's a very functional studio. It's not that big, but these days, if we need a grand piano, we just unplug our hard drive and go to another studio that has one. So it's really nice if for recording these days. Like every studio doesn't have to have everything,
Yeah.
So this is more like a high-end workshop. We can get
Yeah.
small done here, but if we want to put a band together, there's a recording studio down the street that we can just rent for a couple of days and do band stuff and come back here. A lot of people use this place for vocals and guitar tracking. So Brothers Landreth, Carol Luft, so many people just come through here day in and day out because it's just a nice little. It's just a nice warm spot.
Do you ever sit in that room or in one of those rooms when you're doing some writing just to get off by yourself and write some music?
Yeah, because I can close these doors and nobody out in the office can hear me, and I can sing loud and sing bad and nobody cares. And yeah, there's something about it. When my wife retired, she's now in our house and she's home now, and that used to be a place I could sort of be loud and not be embarrassed.
Yeah.
So I kind of, for me to write songs, I need to do embarrassing things. I need to make embarrassing sounds, and so you kind of, if you're shy, and I am a little bit shy about that kind of stuff, I need a place where nobody's listening to me.
Right.
So I can shut these doors and I can do terrible audible things in here and kind of get to the gold.
That's great. Well, that's great. Well, thanks for showing us the inside workings of your studio.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. Like I said, I inherited this. I didn't. This came as a gift when my manager sort of, in a sense, gave himself to this ministry. I collected everything that he had done before that.
So tell us, when people want to start, paying attention to what you're doing and follow you and maybe catch a concert and catch that new album, can you tell us your website, www.stevebell.com?
Stevebell.com. Yep. Okay. Stevebell.com, and everything's there. Like websites these days to have way more than you need, but it's like all, you can see my discography, all that kind of stuff. It's all on Spotify or Apple Music. Sure. Everything's everywhere now. So you can find me. The problem with someone, my age is I've got 23 albums out. Where do you start? So I don't know. Like it's,
where should somebody start when they're brand new to Steve Bell? Maybe your first album and work backward.
Well, the first album's 30 years old, so now it sounds a little dated, but there's some charming songs on there, so I don't know. My last album was called Wouldn't You Love to Know? I'm really proud of it. I think it's a great record. I'd be happy if that was anybody's first encounter with my music. Okay. Some of the albums, I've got an album called My Dinner with Bruce. It's all my favorite Bruce Cockburn covers. I did all Bruce Cockburn songs.
Nice.
And that's actually I think it's one of my best albums. I think it's a great record. I'm really proud of my interpretation and the production, and it feels as personal to me as anything else I've ever done. Yeah. I think you have to sort of pick some spot and start in. My schedule's there. I'm on the road, mostly Canada. I'm going out this fall because I have a new album coming out. So
you're coming down to Ontario soon?
Yeah. I am in Ontario soon. My manager knows when.
Okay, I'll check with Dave. Where are you coming? Are you coming to London?
Yeah. No, I'm not coming to London this time around. So I'm going to be at Little Trinity in Toronto. I know that. I think I'm in Hamilton. I know I'm in Ottawa. We're doing a little bit less this time. Like numbers since COVID, the numbers aren't back to what they were.
Mhm.
And I wanted to put a band on the road just because I always like to put a band on the road when I have a new album. It's
Good.
just fun for me, you know. I mean, most of the time I'm just solo. But we're just a little shy. Like we're not sure if we're gonna have the numbers out. So we're kind of going out a little bit more modest, not as many dates.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're gonna see the problem with that just didn't occur to us, you know, when you're strategizing for the long term, is that like, you know, when you're my age, you start to realize that your fans are not to be weird about it, but dying. You know, it's like, yeah. So I mean, I'm going to be 65 next year, but you know, the upper end of my fans are well into their 80s. You know, and
Yes,
so
yes.
if they're not dying, they're not able to leave their home. You know, and so
Yeah.
that's a reality, right? And so it's like, oh, like you know, like so it's not necessarily that people don't like Steve Bell as much, it's that they're just literally not able to get out or don't
Yeah.
have energy or whatever. So I'm entering into this sort of last stage of that of my demographic is actually has different possibilities now because
Yeah.
of our age. And so it's so I just have to be more careful, I think, you know,
Yeah.
whereas I would risk concerts before that I wasn't sure we're going to do okay. It kind of didn't matter because you'd make it up somewhere else. So we're becoming more and more conservative now.
Yeah, when I talked to Dave a few months ago when I was writing the Faith Today article, he and I were talking about this, and he said, "What's unique about you is that people in pockets around Canada know you. So when you
Yeah.
go to a city, your followers and listeners will attend because it's almost, I don't know how to describe it. It's like an experience that they've been to before, and so they just show up. It's not like you have to, advertise.
Yeah, no. I think there's a lot of people who this has been just it's been the to some degree the soundscape of their lives, and so you know, so they come, they you know whatever I'm doing, they're going to come out and you know I've seen so many of them so many times. I've been touring for so long. I mean, a lot of my fans have become friends because I've just when
Yeah,
you see somebody 30 times, you know, after a
sure.
while, you've had so many conversations. So I would say I have dear friends now just because I've been to town so many times, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
You know, so there's that going on. The other struggle that we're having that we, and again, Dave can talk about this, is that even getting concerts in churches, during COVID, a lot of pastors retired,
yeah.
and younger people have taken over.
Interesting. I
And
never
when
thought
Dave
about that.
and when Dave phones them to ask if we can do a concert, they go, "And you are."
Yeah,
Right? Where it used to be, oh yeah, sure, Steve, we love Steve. Well, thanks. They know Dave
right.
and all that kind of stuff. But now people are coming up underneath, have no experience of it. And COVID kind of drew a line and a bunch of new people came in. And now it's like, oh, we have to say, okay, there's this guy named Steve Bell. He's got this long history, you know.
Yeah,
This is how we do concerts. And so we're having to sell ourselves to churches where we've had the luxury for, you know, 20 years of not really having to do that, you know.
yeah. That's
So it's
fascinating. I never
yeah,
thought about that. The 2 or 3 years during COVID,
yep.
a lot has changed. And in some ways, I think we haven't fully appreciated in different areas of our life what has changed. There have been
Yeah.
changes. I just don't know that they've been written about. But that's
Yeah.
a really good point.
But I know that you're talking and you've got you know you have some real interests in the health of the Canadian Christian music industry. And you know people would consider me sort of in a sense you know the godfather or at least in that you know one of the elders. I would say yeah, senior elder. The problem is that everything that we did for a music culture and a music industry that literally doesn't exist anymore. And so young people come to me where 10 years ago they'd come to me for advice and I would sit them down and talk to them for hours. I just water hose them,
Yeah.
you know. And now it's like, I don't know, but if you figure anything out, let me know. Like
Yeah.
it's a very different
Yeah.
reality. That doesn't mean it can't be done, but we have to sort of shed the way things used to work. And we should probably have a little cry about that, but get over it sooner than later
Yeah.
because it's
It
not
is the
coming.
way it is.
It is the way it is, and it's nobody's fault.
Yeah.
You know, it is. You know, technology changes how people access music, changes how they pay for it. There's nothing to be done about that now, but you know, free ourselves away from past models and say, now how do we?
Exactly. Exactly. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about things have changed and here's where we are.
Yeah,
And in some ways, I see it as kind of a grassroots movement
Yeah,
of recreating something using
yeah.
the tools we have, and that's okay.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the sad news is there's nothing to plug into. The good news is there's no gatekeepers. There's no.
Yes.
It really it has to do with your imagination at this point.
Yeah.
If you can let go of the way you were kind of hoping it was going to be,
Yeah.
and just let your imagination fly. Like, so I know we're kind of going along here. I'm sure you're gonna have to edit most of this out. But when we first started, Dave and I trying to get concerts, so we'd phone up a church and say, can you have Steve Bell? I'm going to throw out a number. It's going to cost you $1,000 plus, flights, and a church pastor's got limited budget, and he's saying, well, I can ask my board. We only meet twice a year, so I'll get back to you next year if it makes the
Yeah.
board meeting. And so we had to, and I wasn't sort of pop enough to get in the like the regular systems. And so Dave, why, it's just genius. He just said, let's think differently about this. Let's take away every objection from a pastor. So the pastor would say, well, we don't have any money for this. There's no budget. And we'd say, and we can't afford the risk. And so Dave would say, how about if we'll sell tickets for the concert and we'll tithe 10% back to the church?
Mm.
You don't charge us rent. You don't charge us anything for advertising, but we'll tithe 10% back. So all of a sudden, the pastor has no financial risk. And then the
Yeah.
pastor would say, we're really busy office. We really can't be thinking about posters and all. We'll do them. So we started making our own posters. We'd make them for each church. We put the tickets. We just every objection,
Yes.
the pastor had, we just take that away until the pastor had to say, I don't like you. You may not come to my church, which is fair enough, right? You're totally allowed to do that, but it
Yeah.
really came down to if you're going to say no, you just have to say no. You don't like what I do, or you don't want it. Fair enough. And so we kind of got in that way. That's how we built a whole thing. It was, and so we weren't even thinking booking agents or all. It's sort of like just take away the objections and let's do something kind of small,
Yes.
keep our costs down so we can afford to go and sing for 100 people,
Yeah.
and it just built from there. And so now a lot of those things have changed, a lot of those, and so we just have to now, if we're going to stay in this for the next 15, 20 years, if we're going to retire, we're going to retire.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, even us, Dave and I, have to think if we're going to stay in this for a while, if we feel that call, we kind of have to free ourselves from a model that we actually created
Yes.
that worked really well for us, but it's not working now. And so, or at least it's not working as well as it used to. And so now do we have the imagination to think a new thing?
Yeah.
And I don't know yet. So
Well, that's why I call it like a grassroots movement again. We're starting from the beginning. Everything's changed. So it's I've been saying this to a lot of people who are like, well, nothing's going to work anymore. There's no industry. There's never going to be.
Yeah.
But I think as it pertains to churches, I think we just have to recreate, sort of how we get in there and give them a reason and help them understand differently maybe than in the past, but overall to give them a reason to want to bring us in. And we're still discovering that.
Yeah, well, I think if I'm going to sort of throw something out there, and I don't know how to do this, but how do we convince pastors and churches that the role of the music arts is deeply important to the formation of church, of communities? Like, so even if we're going to get out of, say, doctrinal stuff, but after COVID, if you remember, like, people going back to churches and people hurt other people online during that time. There's fights about masking, not masking, vaccines, not masking. People within their own churches, like, I'm not going to go back to church if he's going back. There was a lot of that. And there was a lot of anger. There's a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of disappointment that happened. And it wasn't that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when it was time to go back on the road and saying to Dave, I don't know if I don't want to go into that hornet's nest. Like, I don't know if I have the energy for it. And I was praying one night and I'm kind of going, God, I'm old enough. This would be a good time to check out. Like, nobody would blame me. I've had a good career. If I'm going to retire, this would be a very logical time to sort of say, yeah, I don't want to get back in there. And I really felt God saying to me, no, I want you back in there. And then I remember praying in my heart. This all happens in my own way, but praying in my heart, what am I supposed to say about all this stuff? And I felt, God kind of going, yeah, what do you know?
Hmm.
Don't say anything. Like, we need to have people back sitting in pews next to each other and having a good time.
Mhm.
You need to offer a counter narrative that they can still be in the same room and enjoy each other and enjoy me.
Because of the things we do agree on are the most essential parts of it.
And maybe all they can agree on is they like Steve Bell music on that night.
Yeah.
You're not here because you're a Baptist or you're a Catholic or you're pro this or
Yes.
that. You're there because you like Steve Bell. And so Steve Bell shows up and sings his songs and all, it tells the stories and goes home. And then you meet each other the next day at the post office and you kind of go, we had a good night last night, didn't we?
Yeah.
And it runs counter to the narrative, right? It's a
Yeah.
counter narrative.
Yeah.
And so we need to create events. And this is all just pointing to the power of music, the power of art to draw people into a shared experience that is beautiful and life enriching. And so you can say to that person who you don't agree with or who you've got an anger with or something, but we have shared a common moment of beauty and goodness, didn't we?
Yes.
Didn't that happen? Did that happen? I think it did.
Yeah.
And so then maybe we could do that again. Maybe there's another way we can do that. And so I really wonder in this day and age, and I don't know how to sell this to pastors because everybody's kind of worried about their own turf and stuff, but how do we let the arts draw people back into church buildings, right? And say, there's something good here about the space that's been dedicated to God.
Yeah.
Prayer happens here, community happens here. We can think of our spaces differently than we used to, and we should. Maybe we need to have these places open to different groups, and maybe we need to start thinking about churches as being places of refuge if the power goes out, and there's no air conditioning, but there's a place that elderly people can come and cool off or whatever, like. So think differently about our buildings or whatever, but if nothing else, also just being a place that people from different walks of life and different understandings and different levels of commitment can come together and enjoy something in common and have that story.
With a like-minded focus that is similar in Christ.
Yeah.
That is what draws us. And if there's a way we could leave other things at the door, although they're still part of us, but the focus is on that.
Yeah,
and it'd be okay.
Yeah,
for a time.
And we're not gonna solve anything until we love each other again. I mean, it's just not gonna happen. There's just no point bringing up our differences if there isn't a commitment to love. There's just no point. So stay home. I honestly, if we can't start with love, let's not start. I mean, that's in the end. I just think that's just a fundamental reality. We're not going to get anywhere.
That's
Right.
great.
And love is more than just affection. Love is deep appreciation for the other, for their dignity, with their crazy opinions and their and all that kind of stuff. Is that I mean the other person, the dignity of every human being is first and foremost that they're God's good idea.
Yeah.
That you, Chris, are God's good idea. How dare I treat you any other way than that?
Yeah. We may not understand it or agree with all parts of it, but that's really what it boils down to. So, Steve, I really appreciate the feedback and insight that you've been able to provide from years of experience and currently what you're learning and what God's challenging you with and what you're learning about yourself. And I appreciate you spending some time with us to talk about this.
Oh, thanks. I know I run on long, so good luck with the editing of this. But I hope something good comes from it. I really appreciate it. But you too, like it just again, these are I'm glad about the conversation style of this because this is what we need.
Yeah,
I'm actually not an expert, but there's something in the conversation that is gonna unlock something for somebody. And I think, when you really think about God being a triune being, there's something like the doctrine of the Trinity says a lot of things that are incomprehensible, but fundamentally is that God is a communion of self-giving love. You know what I mean? And so when we just dialogue with mutuality and respect and honesty, and love. And love not meaning affection, but love meaning that I desire the best for you. I desire your flourishing more than anything.
Yeah.
Even at cost to myself. That's what love is. It has nothing to do with affection. Affection is a nice additional thing.
Yeah.
It's really sweet, and I hope people get lots of it. But that's not what's going on in the heart of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. What it is, it's a each pouring into the life of the other. Yeah. I and you and me, right?
And that's what's happening, is conversation is happening now in a different way, not trying to recreate what was, but what's going to be. Yeah. And so that's what's important about this. And that's why we're doing what we're doing.
And that's why it feels good, right?
Yeah.
Because, and like it reflects something of the truest nature of us, that we've been made in the image of God, and God is a communion of persons.
Yeah.
A mutual communion. And so when we feel that in conversation, that's the life of the Trinity living in us. That's and we need to tell people that, whether you're Christian or not, when you have that late night conversation with your best friend and you're up to 4 o'clock in the morning, and the next day you can't remember a thing you talked about, it was just great. That's the life of the Trinity bursting out. You're participating in one of the deepest truths of who you are, that you've been made in the image of this triune God, this dialogical, mutually self-donating love. That's why it feels so good. And this is why it doesn't really matter if you can remember what you talked about, because that's not the most important thing about what happened last night. It's that we lost ourselves in this dialogue and this friendship. I mean, and we need to be able to tell people, oh, okay, I know what that is. You just experienced something eternal.
Yeah.
What
really matters, what changes, what evolves our thinking and our deepens our relationships with one another and with God.
Yeah, and that's why we like it. Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Steve. This was really exciting and a really good conversation. And I look forward to the editing process so that I can relive and further, and our listeners as well, to further process this and try to integrate it into our lives and in our relationships. And so thank you so much for being a part of Back to Back.
You've been listening to Back to Back, and we thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to check us out at www.backtobackradio.ca. If you know a Canadian Christian artist that you want to hear on this program, let us know. Well, check us out next week right here on Back to Back.
Back to back, stronger together.